Hey guys, welcome back to Defining Truth Podcast. This is episode 37. Today, Iran on the verge of starting World War III, and also what's going on with the stock markets. Check it out. All right, guys, thanks for listening. If you haven't already, please go to YouTube where you can subscribe to Defining Truth Podcast. Check it out. It's Defining Truth on YouTube. Subscribing is a great way to show your support, and it helps us, get the word out, speaking truth, etc. Also, you can listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon, I believe, pretty much anywhere you can listen to a podcast on Google. And check out definingtruth.org, definingtruth.org. You can see what we're all about, what we do, what we believe, and also pick up a copy of Defining Truth, the book, which is a great culture war guide equipping you with an apologetic for Western civilization and Christian Judaic worldview in today's culture war. Anyways, Brandon, we got a lot to talk about today.
Yeah, did you mention Real Life Network again? We're on Real Life Network?
Yes, also, you can check out Defining Truth, the podcast, on Real Life Network. And actually, if you haven't, you should go to your phone right now and download the Real Life Network app, RLN, Real Life Network app. There's tons of great content on there. It's totally free. Just sign up, create an account with your email, and you can get alerts. And we're on there too, so you can listen to Brandon and I run our mouths about stuff going on in the world.
Which is exactly what we're going to do right now. So let's get into it.
All right. So the whole world is bracing right now for potential global conflict. Iran is losing their mind, as they have been for the last 20 years plus. But I just want to give a quick recap real quick. And then after Iran and Israel sort of update, we're going to talk about what's going on with the stock markets briefly. But as of right now, we are literally on the precipice of global conflict. We're just sitting here waiting to hear what happens next. There were rumors and varying reports about an attack coming maybe early this morning. It didn't happen. Now we're hearing people say it's coming tonight. Trump, in an interview just minutes ago, said that he believed this attack was coming tonight. The Biden administration just announced that they think it's tonight or tomorrow. So who knows? Obviously, some evil guru in Iran knows. But let's give a quick recap on how we got to this point. So if you haven't been following what's been going on over the last several months or even more, let's start at the beginning. So here's a quick timeline. October 7th, Hamas-backed Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon invaded Israel and murdered and raped thousands of civilians. Just to be clear, this is when this, at least current conflict began, although it's been going back years, we know. The terrorists took many Israeli hostages back into Gaza, where Gazan civilians cheered and participated in beating, torturing, and publicly humiliating the hostages. 78% of Gazans at the time, this is just people that lived in Gaza, supported the rape and murder of innocent civilians. That's how it started. In the months that followed, Israel launched an unprecedented mission against the terrorist infrastructure and began repeated attempts to rescue the hostages being held and tortured by the Gazan terrorists. Of the 251 innocent victims stolen from their homes and public places by Hamas terrorists, which, by the way, included Israeli and American citizens, amongst other nationalities as well. Out of the 251, 120 hostages remain today in the hands of these monstrous and evil Hamas terrorists. And we should note that many, many times throughout the extended Israeli war campaign against Hamas and its complicit supporters, Israel offered a quick solution that would end hostilities immediately, and that was for Hamas to let the hostages go. But they refused. They refuse because they're a death cult and they want people dying. They want their own children to die because they glorify murder and death. So these first century monsters continue to wage violent terrorism against our allies in Israel, and the IDF continues to fight back. Continuing on our timeline, recently things took a turn for the worst. On July 27th, a terrorist rocket launched from southern Lebanon into the Israeli Golan Heights hit a playground full of children. As of this time, 12 of those children are confirmed dead, 4 of whom were from the same family. In response, Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister who was in the D.C. area at the time here in the U.S., cut his trip short to return to Israel. The Israelis quickly identified the attackers and those who supported the operation in Iran and developed a response plan. A few days later, July 30th, Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of the Hamas terrorist group, who thought he was comfy cozy back in Supreme Ayatollah's land in Iran, was killed in the heart of Tehran, a very embarrassing incident for the IRGC and the Iranian leadership, who were disgraced in their own territory when their close terrorist ally, who was supposed to be safe with them, was assassinated with surgical precision. Now, there's been conflicting stories as to how that hit was carried out. Some reports that are stating that a hand-fired missile was launched from a nearby hillside overlooking the building he was in. Other reports indicate a pre-placed explosive device was detonated after confirming that the terrorist leader was in his room. Now, in the days that followed, Iran has been in utter panic mode. They've arrested a ton of Iranians. They've at least detained all of the IRGC security personnel around that building because this was a safe house for other terrorists that they used all the time. And they suspect that insiders helped the IDF. I don't think they quite know what's going on. Conflicting reports have come out from the Iranians themselves about whether it was a missile or a bomb. In the days that followed, though, Iran went on their usual rantings about revenge and killing Jews, etc. It's always ironic to me to see the violent Iranian regime. They go out and they murder a bunch of people, and then when they're confronted or receive an appropriate response, they start crying about revenge. It's unbelievable. It's like what they did on October 7th. They cross over, they murder, they rape, they brutalize innocent people. And then when they get bombed, they're like, I can't believe you did this. We got to seek revenge. It's insane. It's savage. But just as they did a few months ago, Iran will probably follow through with their promise now to retaliate. And that's where things, I guess, are a little bit different this time. So the U.S. government is responding this time with a lot more seriousness than before. If you remember, there was that big rocket launch that Iran did, several weeks ago, where many of them were caught by the Israelis themselves, the Iron Dome system, and their allies, which included the United States and France and Britain. But I want to point out some things that are a lot different this time. So we see a few serious moves that to me indicate a next level of threat compared to previous issues. So one, the U.S. Congress asked for authorization to use U.S. military against Iran. They have not done that before since October 7th. This request comes on the heels of recent intelligence briefs, which shows Iran is closer than ever to using a nuclear weapon or obtaining one. And they intend to use it against Israel and the United States if possible, according to this intel brief given to Congress. Two, the Pentagon has moved a considerable amount of U.S. military into the region, including warships, fighter jets, and thousands of troops. In fact, as we speak, I'm getting updates on my phone about different carriers and warships going into the area. Three, Iran themselves have promised publicly that Israel's fears are about to be confirmed. And one of the quotes I thought was interesting from the Iranian Foreign Ministry was that their scientists will be avenged, seemingly alluding to the fact that they have or are close to using a nuclear weapon. The scientists, they're talking about their nuclear scientists. Which would make sense given the congressional request for military authorization and nuclear threat that they indicated. And four, and lastly, the global economy is responding. Global markets as of August 4th were plummeting. We're going to get into that in the next session. But as it relates to this is the largest stock market crash we've seen in a long time. And Japan's market crashed. The Dow Jones was plummeting. S&P was crashing. Bitcoin suffered a tremendous loss to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And at least part of that, although there are other reasons that we'll go into, but at least part of that is fear of global conflict, which we'll discuss in a minute. So that brings us to today, August 5th, when we're recording this. The world awaits, all eyes on Israel and Iran. Different reports coming in by the minute about when they think Iran will launch an attack, but so far it's been quiet. Iran has made some unusual announcements in the last 24 hours, such as warning any and all Arab nations to stay away from their retaliation against Israel. They've claimed that anyone who stops them or gets in their way will be in danger of being attacked themselves. Big talk for Iranians, in my opinion. So far, the countries of Jordan and Saudi Arabia have warned Iran that while they won't allow Israelis or others to use their airspace, they will also not allow Iranian crafts and weapons to cross their airspace either, and saying that they'll defend themselves. So the world waits. We don't know what's going to happen next. In the minutes just that we've began our show here, there's some updates from Baghdad. I got a message from someone in Baghdad right now. Al-Assad military base was under attack by pro-Iranian militias. And I'm hearing from my source that 2 rockets were launched from the back of a white Kia. That's a vehicle, if you're not familiar with it, toward the Americans. No reports of injuries so far. Also, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian was speaking to Sergei Shoigu, the secretary of the Russian Security Council. And he said this, and I quote, "We believe the period of unilateralism for some powers in the world, including the United States, has ended." So what does that mean? Well, everybody I'm talking to, whether they're overseas or here in the U.S. and some of my connections in the government, the going opinion, I guess, is that the only way the Iranians can really affect what they're threatening is if they use some sort of weapon of mass destruction like a nuke. I don't see, based on their previous performance and failure, how they could really affect any of these threats. I mean, they run their mouth a lot. But I just don't see how this is going to play out. I mean, I know they play friends with the Russians, but in my opinion, I don't know if the Russians really want to get into a land war with Israelis backed by, the U.S. military. I don't know. And I would find it hard to believe that if they had or were going to use a nuke imminently, that the world's intelligence communities wouldn't know that. So I think what's more likely is that they're very close to developing it. Now, they have moved this week. I covered that earlier. They have moved somewhere around 1,000 plus rockets into positions in neighboring countries around Israel. I believe this impending attack is going to be bigger than anything they've done before. But with allies' assistance, Israel seems to be able to keep these out. Now, it is worth saying that the Iron Dome has not performed up to expectations for Israel. In fact, the Iron Dome has caught only about 50% of rockets and projectiles coming in towards Israeli citizens. So that means that Israel's relying very heavily on the U.S. and Britain and France to not only preemptively strike and take out these launchers before they launch, but also to help intercept them in the skies. Hence, we've seen a lot of naval forces move into the area with that capability. We did just hear just minutes ago that United Airlines has canceled all flights out of neighboring Amman, Jordan, which is an exit point for a lot of folks working in the CENTCOM area. So I guess everybody's on hold until then. So that's all the updates we have for Iran and Israel's situation. I guess we could move into like an opinion time and just discuss this real quick. So this week I listened to Sean Ryan podcast. He had Eric Prince on there. They had a long talk. It was a great conversation. I recommend you guys go listen to it. And they talked about a lot of different things. But when they talked about Israel, Prince had some really good insight, because there's a lot of questions surrounding why do we support Israel, et cetera. And as a Christian and a believer, there's a lot of reason to support Israel, which is an entirely different conversation. But before you even get there, there's a lot of geopolitical reasons and intelligence reasons to support Israel, right? And a common detractor, and I noticed Sean asked this to Prince in the interview, he goes, well, do you think it's a one-sided, relationship? And it's like, Prince had a great answer. He goes, well, tell me what ally is truly not a one-sided relationship for the United States. I mean, of all the NATO countries, none of them are paying really their fair share. They're supposed to pay 2% of their GDP and contribute to NATO defense. None of them do it. Well, I think they're up to, 11 out of the NATO countries now, but it's not enough. And that's only recently. So is there great benefit to projecting global power? Of course there is. It contributes to world peace. Not only that, but Israel is an ally against a common enemy. What we're really talking about here, I always shift that conversation from, you don't want to talk about Israel. Why don't we talk about the terrorist? Why don't we talk about these entire groups of millions of people in these countries that are bent on destroying Israel and then America? So but before we get into an argument about who our allies are, why don't we talk about who the real enemy is? And I think that distraction is very spiritually dark. It's demonic to me that you have conservatives in the United States that want to rant and talk about Israel as if like you're completely failing to deal with the elephant in the room, which is radical Islamic terrorism whose sole purpose is to wipe you from the face of the earth, Israel and the West. That includes our allies in Europe. And nothing that you can do can appease that. Before we started, we talked about this Swedish activist who is a pro-Palestinian activist or whatever, not a Muslim, okay? Just like a woke European activist. So he decides to move to Gaza, right? To help out, it's like, I don't know what he was thinking. Anyways, long story short.
To live there in solidarity.
Yeah. Guess what happens? He gets tortured and murdered by Hamas. And I just don't understand why that kind of news is not proliferated. Like, what's wrong with those on the left who can't seem to see reality when it smacks them in the face? Part of that has to do with, their motivation. I mean, a lot of it's pride and arrogance, but if you're hell bent on destroying the United States and Western civilization, then you're going to find yourself more often aligned with the terrorists. That's something, unfortunately, that we're seeing amongst conservatives as well, who this sort of weird, sick, distorted worldview that is like all of a sudden anti-Israel. You're finding people who are calling themselves Americans and conservatives, and they've turned against Israel, and they're essentially aligning themselves with terrorists. It is absolutely insane. It's extremely ignorant. Not one single person in that field could accurately defend what they're talking about. We're seeing it at all levels. Very prominent media people down to like lunatics at the local level. It's very, very dangerous. You have to be a child to not understand how global allyships work and why there is a time to invest. There's a time for everything, the Bible says, and there's a time for war. And proactive military involvement is something that a world power has to do. This whole concept of sitting back in your own home and letting your neighbors burn to death is infantile. It's stupid, is what it is. It's unbelievable. So we are 100% both biblically and geopolitically behind Israel, and we should remain there. And we should do our best to eliminate groups like Hamas and the IRGC, who have done nothing but murder innocent people for decades. That's the truth. That's the truth. So the world waits for tonight, an expected Iranian attack, and we'll see what happens next. Who knows? All right, Brandon, let's kick over to what's going on with the global markets. You want to kick us off on just a little recap of what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So markets in the U.S. are down. The Dow Jones, S&P 500 have all been down as of this morning, which is, we're recording here on Monday, August 5th. There's a lot of speculation about why this is happening. Some people say it's a direct result of the markets crashing in Japan. Others are blaming the job market. So really a good indication of where the market is at, if you can't tell by these major stock indexes being down, is you can always look at the volatility index, or the VIX, which kind of measures the fear among investors. It's an inverse of what's happening in the economy or in the markets. As the markets go down, the VIX goes up. So it jumped as much as 172% this morning, which is the highest level for the index since March of 2020, which we, of course, know is when COVID started. Again, some economists are pointing towards a weak snapshot of the U.S. job market, which on Friday added fuel to the fire, raising questions about whether the American economy is on rockier footing than previously thought, prompting bets that the Federal Reserve might have to cut interest rates sooner and more aggressively. In my opinion, that's always a good thing, but I'm not an economist, so don't take my word for it. Again, a reason not to panic, according to some economists, is that the current sell-off, they say, is a result of investors having to untangle complicated, heavily leveraged trades that have artificially boosted stocks. There's a lot of big and confusing words in there. So really, in simpler terms, this statement is saying that the current drop in stock prices is happening because investors are getting out of risky and complicated investments that they had made,
Right.
Which caused stock prices to go up more than they should have, kind of like a balloon inflating too much. And then now as they try to recover and get out of those positions, it's like letting the air out of the balloon too fast, causing stock prices to fall quickly. So there's a lot of stock manipulation that's causing this panic. Of course, what's happening with Iran and Israel is adding to that, coupled with what's happening in Japan. It's kind of the perfect storm for stock prices to drop. Other people, we talked before we came on, other economists are saying this is sort of a market correction from the all-time highs that we've been having. The market can't go up forever. It has to come back down and correct itself. So that's kind of where we're at as of this moment. Markets are getting ready to close, so we'll have to see how it continues into tomorrow and later on this week.
I had some good perspective on, just to follow up on those points, from the Intelligencer at NewYorkMag.com. An article I just read talked about some of the causes that they tried to couple together. One, you just mentioned heavy investment or risky investments that now people are pulling back from. According to the Intelligencer, at least part of this larger decline was driven by massive rethinking of tech-heavy and AI-driven bull market that has propelled capital markets this year, right? We talk about NVIDIA and how all these employees at NVIDIA became millionaires over the last year. The maker of chips that power the AI industry, NVIDIA has lost more than $1.2 trillion in market value in the last 6 weeks alone, after reaching a cap of, it was 3 something, I don't remember. You also had Warren Buffett, who a lot of people follow and respect as an investor. Well, Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway pulled half of its Apple stock, which is just about the most reliable, profitable company in the world. By the way, Apple sits on according to the Intelligencer, a quote, a mind-boggling $277 billion in cash. It's wild. But Buffett, of course, is the most revered investor in the world. So, people study his decisions, and he's got lots of fans. And the implication is that if Buffett thought there was something worth investing in, that he would be using that cash to make more money. So the fact that he's like stockpiling and hiding it is causing people to do the same. Another point was the unemployment report last week. Friday, new data dropped showing that the unemployment rate in the U.S. rose to 4.3% higher than expected. Historically, this is not a super high reading, but what matters here is the speed at which the jobless rate has risen lately. So in the past, a sudden spike in unemployment has indicated a recession is on the way. So again, that's what's causing people to get weak knees here in the market, is that they're reading signs. This observation, according to this article, is called the Sahm rule. It's named for former Federal Reserve economist Claudia Sahm. It's one of the key triggers economists look for in gauging the health of the economy. So again, you have, investors, they see this sort of Sahm rule going into effect. And last week, this gauge tipped over into pointing towards a recession, causing somewhat of a panic. There's a couple other points I don't think I need to go into. Wall Street thinks the Federal Reserve screwed up again. That affects as well. Has to do with the rates. Last week, the Fed opted to keep interest rates steady at like 5.3%, where they've been for about a year. And the decision was expected, but it left investors generally convinced that the central bank would start cutting interest rates in September, marking a key signal for the Fed that its fight against inflation is just about over. And I think lastly, and this is just speculation, but everything we just talked about with Iran, and we didn't even get into Asia and China and Taiwan and what's going on there. The whole world's a little shaky right now. Everyone's on edge. Everybody's expecting something to just blow up at any given time. So I'm curious to see, when we look back in a few days, after this expected attack comes from Iran and then whatever develops from it, I'm curious to see what happens with the market and see what effect geopolitics has on this compared to everything else. So anyways, that's where we're at. That kind of wraps up today. I would just end on a note as a reminder, as a believer, as a Christian, it's very important to stay in touch with what's going on around you. You're called to be salt and light. You're called to be involved and primarily to love others around you, right? To share the gospel, to not be the wicked servant who has received and been forgiven so much and then doesn't share that with others. And I would encourage you to get involved. A lot of people ask, well, what can we do? The short answer is go to your local school board meetings, go to your local town halls with your congressman, get involved in what's happening in the world around you because you care about people. Because we don't live in communist China. We don't live in a dictatorship like North Korea or Iran. And if you're in the United States and you're a Christian, then God allowed you to be born in a place where you have free choice in what happens and in leadership. And I still think there's a lot to be done at the ballot box. So get off the couch, get involved, pay attention. A great way to do that is to follow us. Again, definingtruth.org, definingtruth.org to check us out, and follow us on YouTube as well. Listen to the podcast, and do me a favor, share it with as many as you can. Stay informed because truth matters.